Umagnaanatimirandasya jnananjanashalakaya chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Shwapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Shavadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Rita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanasute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So welcome you all once again for the 8th session of the online course on life lessons from Bhagavad Gita. Today we'll be doing the chapter 6 entitled Dhyana Yoga. So this chapter is entitled Dhyana or meditation. So Krishna is explaining about how to advance through the Ashtanga Yoga process, or the 8 limbs of the yoga process. So beginning stage is known as Arurukshu, or the beginning of the yoga ladder, and leading up to the Aruda, or the perfectional stage of yoga. So basically, how do I begin this yoga and where does it end? Then Krishna, but firstly says about yoga and sannyasa, how they are same. So yoga means connecting. Sannyasa means renouncing. So unless you renounce, you cannot connect to something higher. So this is why it is said to be the same. So unless without sannyasa, you cannot perform yoga, and yoga cannot be, yoga cannot be performed without sannyas, and sannyas cannot be performed without yoga. Analogy is there, just like if your aircraft is on the ground, unless it's lift off the ground, it cannot go into the air. So these are one and the same. Now there are 2 levels in the Ashtanga Yoga, as I said, the beginning, Arurukshu, and the advanced stage. And Krishna also mentions about how the mind is both the friend and enemy. So therefore, there's a need to control the mind and engage it properly. And Krishna talks of the symptoms of a person who has attained perfection in yoga. So what are the stages in the Ashtanga Yoga practice? What are the basic practices? What are the recommendations? And what is the goal of such Ashtanga Yoga is outlined in verses 10 to 17. How do I know I have attained perfection through this Ashtanga Yoga? The various aspects and how to realize this perfection. Just like if I eat some food, I get 3 experiences. One is my hunger gets satisfied. I feel nourished, and I can experience these 3 things simultaneously. I can remove the hunger, I get satisfaction, and nourishment. So similarly, when we attain the perfection in Ashtanga Yoga, we experience intense bliss. That is samadhi, trance, where we become oblivious to the effect of the 3 modes. So one another way to find out whether we have attained perfection in Ashtanga Yoga is whether we realize the super soul. Because we may know that we are the soul, but that only helps us to understand our eternal nature. But more important than that is to have knowledge about everything in this world. And that is possible through the Paramatma realization, because that represents the eternity and knowledge aspect of the absolute truth. Because the Paramatma is residing in all the planets and all the atoms and all the living entities. So if we can realize the Paramatma, we can know everything about this world. Now, Krishna then talks about the methods to attain this yoga ruda state and the success formula of bringing the mind back in case it wanders from the goal. Then Krishna talks about the platform of Brahmabhuta, realizing the Atma, and realizing the Paramatma, the Brahma Samsparsha. So, and Krishna, seeing Krishna everywhere. So these are the three aspects of the absolute truth: realizing the eternity feature, knowledge feature, and the bliss feature. Now, then Krishna talks about the actions of a perfect yogi, then the necessity of the controlling the mind. Now, Arjuna's concern is that this Ashtanga Yoga is impractical, particularly because he is a householder, a grihastha, and a kshatriya. And furthermore, it is Kali Yuga and very impractical because the conditions are not very favorable. Therefore, Krishna offers him a solution that still it is possible to control the mind by suitable practice and detachment. So, detachment means we have to keep the mind engaged so that it does not get distracted. And Krishna's conclusion is that nevertheless, the mind control is a must for yoga. If you have to achieve higher things in life, the mind control is absolutely essential. So now mind control means properly engaging the mind, because the mind cannot be made to stop functioning. Then the next question arises as to what is the destination of one who is unsuccessful in this yoga process. Because when he is practicing this yoga, he is spending some time for the practice as well as getting himself detached from some activities. So someone may ask that he may lose in both spheres. Neither he is successful in the spiritual path nor he is successful in his material life. So therefore, Krishna replies that for a yogi, there is no misfortune even in failure, because Krishna ensures that he will continue from where he has fallen behind. So depending on whether he fell off from the beginning stage or in the final stages, Krishna makes suitable arrangements. As he said in the second chapter himself, that there is no loss or diminution in this process of yoga, and it protects one from the greatest fear of fall down. In conclusion, Krishna tries to establish that Bhakti Yoga is the topmost, and how he is better than one who is performing austerities, one who is cultivating knowledge, and one who is engaged in fruitive activities, because he is personally guided by the Supreme Lord. And therefore, he says the Bhakti Yoga serves Krishna is the best of all yogis because he is sure to attain success. So in the previous chapter, Krishna described how to attain freedom from the three modes by performing Nishkama Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga is basically offering the results of your activities or conducting yourself according to the scriptures. And particularly if you are offering the results of that activity for a higher purpose, that's known as Nishkama Karma Yoga. So why we have to do this is it elevates us through the three modes, from the lowest mode of ignorance to passion to Sattuguna, and we become more receptive to Bhakti Yoga. And some another alternative is this Ashtanga Yoga practice. Either you follow the Nishkama Karma Yoga and come to Bhakti Yoga, or someone may choose to do this Ashtanga Yoga practice. So why is that? We will see. Now Krishna talks about these many types of yoga because each of them has some underlying principle or goal. And if Krishna can show that through bhakti you can get the same goal and much higher, then we need not practice these other types of yoga. In this chapter, Krishna describes how the Ashtanga Yoga in greater detail. Ashtanga, as we said, 8 limbs of yoga or 8 sections of the yoga ladder. He tells how it is the means to control the mind and the senses. Because once the mind and senses are controlled, the intelligence becomes fixed, and once the intelligence is fixed, the consciousness is fixed. Then we can realize the soul and the Paramatma. So, but before practicing the advanced stages of Ashtanga Yoga, one must be purified. Purification is purification of the consciousness. So that is possible only through by practice of Nishkama Karma Yoga, where you are learning to offer the results of the activities or working with the detachment. Working with detachment means we can make best use of the result to further the work. However, this Ashtanga Yoga process is very difficult for people in general to perform. Maybe it is possible for a select few and also the previous ages, but in the Kali Yuga, where there is quarrel and hypocrisy or disagreement, and so therefore, before teaching Ashtanga Yoga, the culmination of Karma Yoga, so Karma Yoga should lead to this Ashtanga Yoga. Because one has to do some preparation for this Ashtanga Yoga. It's not that straight away you go and do Ashtanga Yoga, just like modern yoga societies they are teaching. But that is not really Ashtanga Yoga. But for doing properly Ashtanga Yoga, one should first practice Karma Yoga, and then when he becomes detached, then he becomes qualified for Ashtanga Yoga. Like for example, who's going to sit in the forest and meditate for a long time unless he has developed some detachment from his daily life. So therefore, Krishna first praises Nishkama Karma Yoga because that is what makes one eligible for performing Ashtanga Yoga. Because it is Nishkama Karma Yoga is practical, because for Ashtanga Yoga you have to desist from some activities which may not be possible for everyone. But Nishkama Karma can be practiced by anyone in the Varnashrama Dharma. Now, Krishna then talks about the advancement through this Ashtanga Yoga process. How do I know where I am going while practicing this yoga? So he first of all defines what is the beginning and what is the end of this Ashtanga Yoga process. So Krishna talks about who is a real sannyasi, because without renouncing, we cannot progress in life. All the time, from the birth to death, we are actually renouncing something. In other words, we have to give up. For example, the body itself, we are giving up the old body and accepting a new body. So throughout our life, we are doing this sannyasa. And unless we practice this sannyasa, we cannot proceed higher, and that is known as yoga. Yoga means connecting with a higher purpose. To want the higher goal, we have to sacrifice the lower desires. Anashrita karma phalam. Anashrita means one who is unattached. Unattached to what? Karma phalam, the fruits of his work. Because the moment you do some work, there is going to be a result, fruit, either good or bad. But attached to the fruits means you are not able to proceed further with the work. Rather, you are interested in enjoying or suffering the results of the activities. But unattached means you utilize the results of any action to progress further in work. Because without doing work, we cannot be peaceful. Karyam karma karoti saha. So dutifully performs his prescribed work. So what is prescribed work? What is given in the scriptures? What is given by the spiritual master? And what is practiced in the association of saintly people? So if we perform this prescribed work, then we can become unattached to the fruits of his work, because we always see that my work is benefiting someone, and I am benefiting by someone's work. Sa sannyasi cha yogi cha. He is a real sannyasi and a true yogi. So basically, without sannyasa, you cannot be a yogi, and without being a yogi, you cannot practice sannyasa. Just like when you want to walk, you have to put one leg forward and lift the other leg. So he is one who does, nor he who lights no fire. In other words, sacrifice is fundamental to progress in yoga. You should learn to sacrifice something for getting something higher. So, in other words, he should be prepared to perform some sacrifice. And he cannot afford to be idle or not perform any work. Because the moment he remains idle, he has to suffer the consequences of the actions, the past and present and future, which are carried out by the three modes. So this work is essential even to maintain the body and the mind peaceful. Then what to speak about spiritual life? So one who desires practicing Ashtanga Yoga should not suddenly give up his prescribed duties, Karma Yoga. Why? Because this Karma Yoga is meant to purify the heart or purify the consciousness. The work itself is purifying. It makes you detached from the results of the activities if you do it in a certain prescribed manner. So although working such a Karma Yogi renounces the results of his action, he is called a sannyasi. And because his mind doesn't dwell on the enjoyment of the sense object, he is called a yogi. The sense object means my eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. They, if I dwell on those sense objects, I become attached to what I see, smell, taste, and touch. And then my mind is not under control. Therefore, the mind has to be detached from the object of the senses by meditating on the goal. Now, Krishna again establishes that detached action is same as renunciation. So renunciation means you are able to use the result of any activity to further work. And for one can never become yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. So unless you give up your lower desires, you cannot function to fulfill the higher desires. The desire is the nature of the soul. Only thing we have to transform our desires and progress in life. So sannyasa means to be fixed in jnana. So unless we have proper knowledge, it is not possible to change the desires. Now, by stopping the functions of the senses or renouncing the sannyasa means to be fixed in jnana, characterized by stopping the functions of the senses. So what does it mean stopping the function of the senses? Senses have to be functioning, but instead of allowing them to go behind the sense objects, we have to keep it under the control of the mind, or renouncing the results of actions, because we have no control over the results of an action. So naturally, there's no point in trying to dictate the results. We can only control the actions and not the results, because there are other factors involved in the production of the results. So yoga means to have a mind which is not agitated by the thirst to enjoy sense objects. So actually, the sense objects will not give us any pleasure, but because we have this thirst, some illusory desire, we think that we will be happy by fulfilling these desires. So we have to control this urge to enjoy the senses, because a learned person knows that cannot fulfill those desires. Therefore, sannyasa and yoga could mean the same, depending on to what degree you are practicing both. In the first two verses, Krishna told that an Ashtanga yogi should not give up Nishkama Karma Yoga, because Ashtanga Yoga, there are so many rules and regulations which one cannot abruptly practice. He will find it difficult. So therefore, he has to first practice Nishkama Karma Yoga, gradually come towards Ashtanga Yoga. And that sannyasa and yoga are the same. So should the Ashtanga yogi practice Nishkama Karma Yoga for his whole life? Does it mean he, in one life he does, many lifetimes he does Nishkama Karma Yoga, and then he will come to Ashtanga Yoga maybe in some other lifetime? No. Just like an aircraft is there, it doesn't run on the runway forever. At some point, it has to lift off into the air. Therefore, Krishna says that explains this process, that there are different stages. But broadly, there are two stages. One is the beginning stage and the culmination. In the beginning, you have to follow these stages. Yama means all the don'ts, what you should not do, the regulations or prohibitions. And the niyama, which means what you should do, or the rules or prescriptions. And then you have the asana, the bodily exercises. Basically, you are regulating the function of the senses and sense objects. Then you have the pranayama, or the breathing, because the breathing controls the functions of the working senses. We are able to move our hands, legs, and the excretion, digestion, and the reproductive system by the breathing process. That has to be regulated. And then you have pratyahara. Ahara means feeding. Pratyahara means regulating the senses from the sense objects. What you see, smell, taste, and touch, you try to regulate that. And then that leads to dharana, or fixing the mind on the Lord's form. So when you practice these first four stages, then you are able to recognize the Lord, like the presence of the Lord. What are his qualities, activities, name, and attributes? We get a perception. Then when it becomes intensified, we are able to feel the presence of the Lord. And that leads to samadhi or trance, where we are become oblivious to the effects of the three modes and its consequences, like the threefold miseries and birth, death, old age, and disease. So samadhi is actually the beginning of the activity when the soul begins to function. Right now, because we are thinking we are the body, we are not able to function like the soul. So, but samadhi is the stage when we really the soul becomes active. So normally people think that samadhi means we are put to rest. Once a person dies, they build a samadhi, and that's the end of his story. But actually, samadhi means the stage when the soul actually becomes active, which was till then in bound by the three modes. So Arjuna, for example, he is in perfect samadhi because he is able to perform his duties of a kshatriya perfectly, because he is fixing his mind on Krishna. Krishna says, while remembering me, you fight. So that is when, in the samadhi stage, only one can be the most productive, like Arjuna was. We will not go into the details of this. Now, the beginning stage of this yoga process, one has to perform some prescribed duties. In other words, someone has to prescribe to you what you have to do to progress on this path of yoga. And that is the cause of elevation. So simple prescribed duty is the Varnashrama system. One should cultivate detachment. The whole purpose of Varnashrama is to get detached from the lower modes and also practice Ashtanga Yoga doing asanas, etc. Because the mind and body are related. Once you regulate the body, then the mind also becomes controlled. That gradually purifies the heart or the consciousness. Why? Because the desires are situated in the heart. And these desires have to be purified. That is possible through proper action, proper words. Now, in the perfectional stage, one has reached the advanced stage of yoga. He is become completely purified of material desires. In other words, his desires become transformed. All along, his desires have been to fulfill some ulterior motive. Now, that same desires are used to fulfill the satisfy the Supreme Lord and other living entities. Then he, at that stage, when his desires have become completely purified, then there's no need for him to do even Nishkama Karma Yoga, where he still has to do some work. And he's able to practice Ashtanga Yoga, where he's able to regulate his activities and exclusively. So then one neither acts for sense gratification or engages in fruitive activities. So in other words, the Karma Yoga should lead to this Ashtanga Yoga. The purpose being that mind control is possible only through Ashtanga Yoga. So this is the stage of steady meditation or Dhyana. Because this helps to detach himself from the bodily concept. In Karma Yoga, still you are maintaining the bodily concept. But through Ashtanga Yoga, you are able to, once you realize the Paramatma, then only you can realize your own self. Now the 8 limbs of Ashtanga are depicted in the flow chart we saw. Mind control and detachment from sense objects. Mind control means, again, engaging the mind from thinking on the Supreme Lord and detaching it from thinking about the sense objects. That is the requirement for to come to the perfectional stage, where the mind is fully absorbed in knowledge about the Supreme Lord. So in the next 2 verses, Krishna describes the importance of mind control and discourages Arjuna, indicating the practicality of the path. So then why Krishna first of all has to talk about Ashtanga Yoga and then discourage Arjuna? Because although Bhakti, Krishna has been emphasizing Bhakti throughout the Bhagavad Gita, our tendency is to go towards these other yoga processes because we have desires. Although our desires are not pure, uh, and that is possible through bhakti, but we have this tendency to cultivate these other desires, and therefore we take to the other processes. But still, we will not be successful in fulfilling the desires through these other processes. Therefore, Krishna is discouraging Arjuna that he thinks it is impractical for Arjuna, knowing very well the nature of Arjuna. Now, the way Krishna presents this Bhakti Yoga is he compares it with other forms of yoga to show how the whatever results you can get through this other process, you can get through Bhakti in a much better way. And what you cannot get through this other yoga process, you can still achieve through process of Bhakti because it is personally guided by Lord Krishna. Now, Krishna then talks about how the mind is both the friend and enemy. Uddaret Atmana Atmanam. Uddaret means deliver. Atmanam means oneself, the soul. Again, Atma here also means the mind. So one must deliver himself, the soul, by the mind. Although the mind is inferior to the soul, it still can help the soul. Atmanam avashadiyat. Atmanam means by the mind. Avashadiyat means one shouldn't degrade himself by the distracted senses. Because the mind can get distracted by the senses, and then one can forget his original nature. Atmaiva hi atmano bandhur. So here Atma in one sense means the soul, and in one sense it means the mind. The controlled mind is the friend of the soul, bandhu. Atmaiva hi ripuratmanaha. The same mind can be one's enemy if it is uncontrolled. Ripu means enemy. Bandhur atmatmanastasya. The mind is the best of friend for whom enatma eva atmana jitaha. Jitaha means conquered. One who has conquered it, or one who is able to utilize it properly. And anatmanastu shatrutve. Anatma means one who has not controlled it. Shatruvat means enemy. The mind is the greatest enemy for who has failed to control it, conquer it. Artet atmeva shatruvat. Now, what are the symptoms of a person in the perfectional stage of yoga? Krishna has explained what one should do while practicing yoga, and having practiced that, what stage he should attain. So, jitatmana prashantasya. Jitatmana means controlling the mind. What will he attain? Prashantasya, tranquility, peace. Peace means not stilling the mind. Peace means not disturbed by the three modes. Then Paramatma Samahitaha. Paramatma means the super soul. Samahita means approached, completely approached. He is able to perceive the presence of the super soul who is eternal friend, well-wisher, benefactor. And then Shitoshna Sukha Dukkeshu. Shitoshna means heat and cold, the dualities of life. Sukha Dukkeshu means happiness and distress. These are perceived in the bodily level. So he becomes unaffected by these two things. And Tata Mana Apamanayo. Honor means Mana, Apamana means dishonor. So these are experienced at the mental level. So he is able to tolerate this disturbance to the mind also. And Jnana Vijnana Triptatma. Jnana and Vijnana means knowledge and realization. Theoretical and practical knowledge. Triptatma means satisfied. He is fully satisfied in theoretical and practical knowledge coming from the scriptures. And Kutasto Vijitendriya. Kutastha means self-control or situated. Actually, situated in transcendence means Kutastha. And Jitendriya means self-control. His senses, mind, and intelligence are under the control of the soul or consciousness, purified. Yukta ityuchyate yogi. He is said to be a yogi or one who has attained perfection. He is fully acting on the platform of the soul. Then what is the further result? Samaloshrashma Kanchanaha. He is able to have an equal vision of pebbles, stones, or gold. So it doesn't mean he sees that 1 kilogram of stone is equal to 1 kilogram of gold. No, he knows that gold or pebbles or stone have the relative importance. In some situation, the gold is most important. And in some situation, the pebbles or sometimes the stone may be more important. It can help us accomplish something where the gold cannot, or stone cannot, or pebble cannot. So this equal vision he is able to have. And Suhran Mitradi Udasina. Three types of people he comes across. One is Suhrid means well-wisher. Mitrari means enemies. Ari means enemies. Mitra means benefactors. And Udasina means the neutral. And Madhyastha Dvesha Bandhushu. Madhyastha means mediator. Dvesha means envious. And Bandhushu means friends. And Sadhu means the saintly people. Apicha Papeshu, the sinners. So Samabuddhir Vishishyate. Samabuddhir means he is equipoised. And Buddhi Vishishyate means further advanced person. A further advanced person is equipoised to all people, well-wishers, benefactors, the neutral, mediators, the envious, friends and enemies, the pious and the sinners. Because he sees all of these people situated in different levels. So according to our relative perception, someone may be appear to be our friend. It's all circumstantial. Like in a drama, each person is playing different roles. So we cannot blame them for playing those roles because they are being directed by someone. So the three modes of material nature are directed different people to function in different ways. So we cannot blame that because it is under the control of the Lord. We have to conduct ourselves in such a way that we don't get disturbed by all these different people. So having described the perfectional stage of the Ashtanga Yoga, Krishna will now describe the activities of the practice stage. That is the method to achieve the goal of perfection. So what are the stages in the Ashtanga Yoga practice? One is one has to always engage body, mind and self in Samadhi. Yoga Yunjita Satatam. Always. It is not a one-time affair. You have to do this always throughout our life. That is engaging the body, mind and the soul accordingly. And living in a secluded place. Rahasi means situated, living. Sthitaha means ekaki means alone. What does secluded place mean? There is no secluded place, especially in the modern world. Even if you are in the middle of a cricket ground, you are in front of a big audience and you have to be detached from them. Otherwise, you cannot perform your job. So that is the meaning of ekaki, means he is not disturbed by the surroundings. And he is always controlling the mind. Yata chitta atma. Atma here means mind. And what is again controlling the mind means he is able to engage the mind. And free from all desires and possessiveness. Nirashi aparigraha. Aparigraha means possessiveness. Nirashi means free from all desires. So, but he has to have some desire. In other words, he recognizes that everything belongs to God and his desire should be to fulfill the desire of the Lord, like Arjuna. Now, there are some basic practices in this Ashtanga Yoga. That is sitting firmly in a clean, sacred and secluded place. So we cannot do this Ashtanga Yoga in any place or any time, any situation. We have to be very selective. It should be clean in a pilgrimage site or a secluded place, and not too high, because if it's too high, you cannot get up and get down. Too low, because if it's too low, then you can get flooded or some animals can crawl over you. And you put kusha grass to ward off all the evil effects. And then with the deer skin, because deer skin has some antiseptic properties by which insects and reptiles will not crawl over it. And a soft cloth so that it doesn't hurt you while sitting on this skin. One has to fix the mind on one point. So mind needs an object of meditation. And this way you are able to control the mind and senses. Otherwise the mind, the senses will become agitated. And we have to break this yoga, just like the many yogis had to give up the yoga practice because their mind got disturbed through the senses. And one should do yoga for the purpose of purification of the consciousness. Ultimately, this whole process of yoga is to transform our consciousness. And That's Atma Vishuddhaye. So purification of consciousness means just like if you purify the mirror, clean the mirror, you're able to see yourself clearly. Similarly, when you purify the consciousness, we are able to perceive that we are the soul, and we are also able to perceive the presence of the super soul. Further, one has to sit erect by keeping the body, neck, and head straight. So in this way, there is perfect flow of the life airs within the body, and the soul is well situated. And being motionless and firm, staring steadily at the tip of the nose. So why we have to stare at the tip of the nose? Because if you open our eyes completely, then we get distracted. And if you close our eyes, then we tend to fall asleep. So like this, one has to control every function of his body. And at the same time, he's meditating on the form, mat chitta. That is, he has to perceive the presence of the Paramatma uh, by withdrawing the mind from sense objects. The mind has a natural tendency to go behind the sense objects. In other words, what he is seeing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Instead, the mind should be focused on the Paramatma. And this way, he becomes fearless about the effect of the three modes, which are constantly producing some dualities. And he's with a vow of celibacy. Celibacy means one-pointedness. That is, uh, when we break a celibacy, we think we become dependent on someone else or something else. So celibacy means we learn to depend fully on the Lord, and making me the ultimate goal of life. So he only wants to achieve the Lord. So Mat Para. This way he is able to transcend the three modes. Now, what is the goal of Ashtanga Yoga? By practicing control of body, mind, and activities with regulated mind, Niyata Manasaha, the yogi attains cessation of material existence. He is in this world, but he is unaffected by that world. Like the example we gave of the lotus in the pond. It is always drawing its energy from the sun. At the same time, it's not affected by the dirty water surrounding it. So that's why it's known as Nirvana Parama. And he attains Lord Krishna's kingdom, Mat Samstam. Although he is in the material world, just like the embassy is there in the foreign country, but it belongs to the original country and not the country where it is situated. Similarly, although we are in this material world, we belong to the Krishna's kingdom. We have every facility offered in this material world to go back to that world which is described in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Now, there are some recommendations in the Ashtanga Yoga practice. One is to control the diet. That is, we should not eat too much and fall sick, or eat too little and become weak, or sleep too much, or sleeping too little, or regulation in the habits of eating, sleeping, recreation, and work. This has to be regulated, moderated. And this way we are able to mitigate all material suffering. In other words, if you do something less or more also, it produces suffering. Yuktahara viharasya, yukta chestasya karmasu, yukta swapnavabodhasya yogo bhavati. Dukkaha means mitigating all material suffering. If we regulate all this eating, sleeping, and the recreation and work, you will be able to overcome suffering while in this material world itself. And once we reach the perfectional stage, we are able to discipline the mental activities or consciousness. Vinitam Chittam. The consciousness is fixed on the Supreme. And being fixed in the self or transcendence, Atman Yevava Tishtate. We are able to get back our real ego. The real ego is to recognize that I am part and parcel of God, I am a servant of God, I have to love God, love other living entities. And devoid of all material desire, Nispriha Sarva Kamebhyo. When we try to satisfy our desires independent of God, then it becomes lust. And the same desire, when you're trying to satisfy in cooperation with God, then it becomes prema or love. Prema. Now, the example is given of a lamp in a windless place. And the lamp is surrounded by wind, it becomes to waver. But if you take the same lamp in a place where there's no much wind, it's very steady, it gives proper heat and light. So the yogi whose mind is controlled, yatachittasya, he remains steady in his meditation. He is able to constantly feel the presence of God with him as Paramatma. And therefore he is able to function properly in this world. Yata dhipo nivatasto nengate so Sopama smata. Upama means analogy. Yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogam atmanaha. Now, what does one realize in the perfection state? For example, if you are eating food, the proof in the pudding is in the eating. So how do I know that I have achieved perfection? You get the realization. Nobody else has to tell you. Of course, someone has to certify that you have attained perfection, but still you can realize it for yourself. Just as when you're eating food, hunger goes away and you become satisfied and nourished. That is the proof that you have eaten a good meal. Similarly, when you have perfected yoga, your consciousness will completely restrained from material mental activities. What is material mental activity? The mind has a choice to focus on the temporary or the permanent. So when we restrain from the temporary flickering mental speculation and fix the mind on a permanent objective, then it becomes uh, elevates our consciousness. So one is able to see the self by pure mind and satisfied with it. So ultimately, satisfaction comes from the soul only. It is not from the senses or the sense objects, or because the soul by nature is part and parcel of the Lord, who is always satisfied. And one gets boundless spiritual bliss by spiritual intelligence. The intelligence of the soul becomes activated, and uh, then we don't depend on these material temporary senses, because in each body we have a different set of sense objects and they have many imperfections and they cannot give any satisfaction to the soul. The soul gets satisfaction from itself and from the Supreme Lord. One is never deviated from the truth of one's spirituality. He will never forgets that he is the soul. It's very likely that in our present condition we tend to forget that we are the soul. But on this stage, we are able to always remember that we are the soul and not the body. And having obtained this, he thinks there is no greater gain. He doesn't feel the need for going after something else. In this material world, there's always, we feel that something less, we have not achieved something. But having achieved this self-realization, he is fully satisfied. Just like a glass of fully filled with water, there's no need to fill it further. So situated in full determination, one is never shaken even in the greatest difficulty. Greatest difficulty is when we arises when we forget our nature. So yam labdva chaparam labham manyante nadikam tadaha tasmin stito na dukkena gurunapi vichalyate. Gurunapi means heavy, greatest. Gurunapi vichalyate. He is not shaken. Vichalyate means never shaken. Even the greatest difficulty. Greatest difficulty can occur at the time of death. Even at that time, he is not disturbed, because just like Socrates was there, he was fed with the poison. But he was not disturbed because he had realized that he is the soul and not the body. This stage of samadhi or trance called asampragnata samadhi. There are two types of samadhi, sampragnata samadhi and asampragnata samadhi. So sampragnata samadhi means it involves meditation on various gross or subtle objects. One comes to transcendental position by various philosophical researches. In other words, he tries to attain satisfaction in this world by acquiring all that is required. For example, if you want to be peaceful in life, you have to have proper money, proper residence, and all the basic necessities. So he is able to be peaceful because he has acquired what are all the necessities. That is one kind of sampragnata samadhi. Asampragnata samadhi means it involves meditation with no object. In other words, he is not dependent on these external situations. One becomes transcendental to all sorts of happiness derived from the senses. The senses create an illusory happiness. Sometimes the child is there. If you want to keep him peaceful, you have to give him some toys, which are ultimately of no value. So mostly we are happy when we have all these things which we think will give us happiness. But the moment we are separated from that, then immediately our samadhi breaks. But one who is in asampragnata samadhi, he has real freedom from all material miseries. So temporarily we are able to overcome the material miseries by all these facilities. But the moment we are deprived of these facilities, our miseries return back. But when we are in Sampragnata Samadhi, there's no scope for any misery. because we are fully situated on the platform of the soul. And furthermore, we are able to realize the super soul that is known as the Brahma Sansparsha. Not only do we realize ourselves, we are even able to realize the super soul who is much more superior to the soul. The soul is also knowledgeable, soul is also eternal, but the super soul is more knowledgeable and more conscious. So, what are the methods to attain this perfectional stage? One should be determined. Determination, nischayena, without deviation, anirvinna chetasa. One should not deviate from this yoga process and practice it with determination. And give up all material desires born of mental fiction. The mind is always speculating as to what can give us happiness or what we should pursue in life. But we know that ultimately they don't give us any satisfaction. So therefore, kamam tyaktva. So this tendency to get happiness from the sense object should be curtailed, and the mind should try to get satisfaction from the soul. Controlling all the senses on all sides by the mind. So how is it possible? We have to regulate the senses. How is that possible? With the help of the mind, which is, and what is the final stage? Gradually coming to trance. Trance means samadhi, where you get intense bliss or happiness, everlasting happiness. How? Through intelligence. So that is why intelligence has a very important role to guide the mind, and sustained by full conviction. This is two types of intelligence. One is material intelligence, which is always flickering. The spiritual intelligence comes from practicing devotion, and one is fully convinced that I can be happy on the platform of the soul, and I don't need to depend on this material senses and sense objects. And thus, he's fixing the mind on the self alone, thinking of nothing else. He's fully aware of himself. Just like in a dream, you may seem to be happy or suffering. The moment you wake up, that is your real position. So, sama shanai shanai means every moment. Uparamet buddhya drita grihitaya atma samstam manakritva na kinchit api chintaye. Now, what is the success formula? How to attain success in the yoga? Is to bring the mind back from very important verse, yato yato nischalati. From wherever and whenever, nischalati, mind wanders. Why is it wandering? Its nature is like that. What is its nature? Chanchalam astiram. Manas chanchalam astiram. The mind's nature is to be flickering and unsteady. It has been designed like that. Otherwise, it cannot function. So why is it like that? Due to passion or past attachment, the desire to enjoy and the past experiences make the mind unsteady and flickering. But what one should do? Tata niyam yaitat. One must certainly withdraw the mind. The mind's duty is to wander, and our duty is to withdraw it. Atmanyeva vasham nayat. How? Bring it back under the control of the self. So that is, you make it cooperate with the soul. And endeavoring to bring back the mind in this way, the yogi will again experience the bliss or samadhi and comes to the stage of Brahmabhuta. Brahmabhuta means self-realized stage, or realizing Atma and Paramatma, or Brahma Sansparsha. The yogi whose mind is peaceful, Prashanta Manasam, by being freed, fixed on me, attains supreme bliss, everlasting happiness. Sukham Uttamam. He is, in other words, it's not arising due to the three modes. He is devoid of passion, Shanta Rajasam, free of sin, Akalmasham, and realizes quality to identity with the Brahman, or the eternal feature, Brahma Bhuta. And Brahma Sansparsha platform is realizing the Paramatma. Thus, by constant practice, the self-control yogi is freed of all sin. Vigata Kalmasha. Vigata means free. Kalmasha means sin. Contacts the Supreme Spirit. Although the Supreme Spirit, the Paramatma, is constantly associating, present with him, only then he is able to feel his real presence. Just like we take many things for granted. But this Yogi is able to feel the presence of the super soul who has been his constant companion. And that is known as Brahma Sansparsha. And then he is able to get the full benefit of the presence of the super soul, who is giving them all knowledge to live happy in this world and the world beyond, and attains supreme bliss. He is called Jivan Mukta, liberated even in this life. Even though he is in this material world, he is not affected, not disturbed by the three modes or the dualities. What is the vision of such a perfect yogi? Huh? How does he see the presence of the super soul or Krishna everywhere, the knowledge and the bliss feature? How he is able to understand this world and be happy and peaceful in this world? Sarva Bhutastam Atmanam. The true yogi observes me, the super soul in all beings. He is seeing how the super soul is present in all the living entities and all the material elements. Sarva Bhutam, Bhutani Atmani, Chatmani, and sees every living being in me. He sees how every living entity is dependent on the Lord. Ikshate Yoga Yuktatma. Indeed, a self-realized person sees me, or he sees how the Lord is controlling everything. Sarvatma, Sarvatra Samadarshina, the Supreme Lord everywhere, in all the planetary systems, in every location. He sees how, just like the sun is present everywhere. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami sacha mena pranashyati. Very important. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost to him, nor is he ever lost to me. Wherever you may be, you are able to see the sun and feel the sun's heat. Similarly, the person, yogi, is able to perceive the presence of the Lord in every situation, in every place, every time, place, circumstance. And what are the actions of such a perfect yogi? He worships me as one. He doesn't worship many people. He doesn't worship demigods or whomever he thinks is God. He worships exclusively God, though situated in all entities as super soul. The same God is present everywhere, but he doesn't start worshipping everyone for that matter. He just focuses his worship for God, just like watering the root of a tree or feeding the stomach, satisfy the entire tree or the body. So he is able to fix his mind on the one super soul, Paramatma, and thus exists in me in all circumstances. He sees everything in connection with the super soul, all living entities and material nature. So he sees all beings equal by comparison to his own self and considers their happiness and distress as his own. Normally, we think that I am enjoying better than someone, or someone is enjoying better than me, or I am suffering more than someone, or someone is suffering more than me. But this yogi is able to see the connection of every living entity with the super soul, and he is assured that the Lord will take care of all the living entities, including myself. So, the Arjuna felt that such equal vision cannot be long lasting. Even though Krishna is telling the benefits of practicing the Ashtanga Yoga, Arjuna feels that he cannot practice this yoga or attain this perfection because one will be able to maintain such equal vision for friends and neutral persons, but not for enemies. But, he will not be able to maintain this yoga practice when the situations are not conducive. So Arjuna now speaks to Krishna that the practice of Ashtanga Yoga is difficult. Although the goal seems to be very lucrative, promising, but still he feels that he will not be able to endure the process. Therefore, Krishna instructs him about the necessity of controlling the mind. Now, Arjuna's concern is that Ashtanga Yoga is impractical mainly due to the flickering mind, fickle mind. Madhusudana, oh Madhusudana means one who clears all the doubts. The system of yoga which you have described appears impractical and unendurable to me. Okay, maybe first of all, I doubt if I can practice it. Even if you practice it, I don't know how long. Why? Because the mind is restless and unsteady. He has experience of this mind, how it has functioned in the past. He knew that the mind is restless and unsteady. Chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramati paravadridham tasyaham nigraham manye vayor so dushkaram. For Krishna, the mind is flickering. Flickering means chanchalam. Pramati means turbulent. Balavad, very strong. Dridam, obstinate or stubborn. We cannot remove our thoughts. If you're thinking something, we cannot overcome the negative thoughts. Tasyaham nigraham. Nigraham means subdue. Manye, I think. Aham, I. To subdue the mind, I think. Vayurivasa dushkaram. More difficult than controlling the wind. Even we are able to control the wind using some windmill and tap the energy. But it's impossible to control the mind due to its flickering, turbulent, obstinate, and strong nature. Although the discriminating intelligence is supposed to direct the mind, the obstinate mind attached to enjoyment often overcomes the intellect. The intelligence becomes weakened by such a strong mind attached to sense objects. Such a strong mind is supposed to be controlled by the practice of yoga, but Arjuna found it impractical for an ordinary person. So in the next two verses, Krishna gives solution for dealing with the mind. Now, Krishna's solution is to control the mind by practice and detachment. What you should do and what you should not do. Asamshayam Mahabaho. Krishna agrees with Arjuna. Yes, it is undoubtedly Mano Durnigraham Chalam. Very difficult to curb the Chalam or restless Mana, mind. Mighty on the one. It is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind. Abhyasena the Kaunteya Vairagena Chagrihate. But for Arjuna, by suitable and repeated practice. Abhyasa means suitable and repeated. Vairagyena chigrihite. By with the detachment, one can control the mind. So in other words, you have to feed something to the mind and starve the mind of some things. That is the only way. You should give it something and deny it something. So the Krishna's conclusion is, nevertheless, mind control is the must for yoga. If you want to progress in life, you have to control the mind or regulate the mind. So one whose mind is uncontrolled, self-realization is difficult. We will tend to forget that we are the soul if we don't control the mind. But it is possible for one whose mind is controlled, who endeavors by appropriate means. Even though it is difficult, it is not impossible. That's what Krishna is trying to say. There are many things in life we think it is difficult, but by adopting the means, proper means, we are able to achieve success. The yoga practice without controlling mind from material enjoyment. So what is it we are controlling? The mind means trying to free it from the desire to enjoy in this world through the senses. It is not possible. It's a waste of time to try to control the mind while allowing it to enjoy the way it wants to. It's like trying to ignite fire while putting water on it. One side you are trying to ignite it, at the same time you are putting water to douse it. So this way it is not possible to control the mind. The yogis who control the minds and give up their propensities for material enjoyment, perfect yoga and attain liberation. Liberation means freedom from the three modes, which produce happiness and distress. Now, having heard from Krishna that one should endeavor to control the mind in the practice of yoga, Arjuna became inquisitive to know what happens to someone who fails to control the continue the endeavor. Okay, even if he were to practice this yoga, what if he would fail in the middle? What will be the fate of such a person? Just like he gives the analogy, like a cloud is there and the cloud breaks away from the parent cloud. It just dissolves in the air. So maybe Arjuna wants to inquire about the fate of a fallen yogi or the unsuccessful yogi. What is his destination? For Krishna, if one takes up to this yoga with faith, he is faithful nevertheless, but fails to continue the path. Why? Due to his unsteady mind, and thus does not attain perfection. Because Krishna has told that mind control is essential, and he has failed to do that. So, what will be his destination? Does he not fall away from both spiritual and material success? Because he has given up something in this material world to take to spiritual life. And in that, he has not achieved the goal. So, in other words, he has failed both spiritually and materially. So, does he not perish like a cloud which has broken away from the original cloud? I see no one but you who can dispel this doubt. Nevertheless, he puts forth his doubt to Krishna because he is confident that Krishna will clear this. Now, there are three paths which one can do to control the mind. One is self-realization is sought by the path of knowledge or Jnana Yoga, by the practice. That is by mental speculation, by speculating, analyzing, or the Sankhya process, one can realize that he is the soul and not the body. The other is by practice of the Eightfold Yoga system, Ashtanga Yoga, where you are regulating your breathing, sitting, and other. Or you can attain self-realization by devotional service unto Lord Krishna, Bhakti Yoga. So here, the three processes, karma, jnana, and Ashtanga Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, they have the methods are different, the goals are different, but in each of these processes, one has to realize the constitutional position of the living entity. Ultimately, they should help us to realize the self. Because unless we realize self, we cannot act on the platform of the soul and cannot attain eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And his relationship with God, Sambandha, and the activities whereby he can re-establish the lost link or Abhideya and achieve the highest stage of love of God or Krishna consciousness, Prayodhana. So this yoga has basically three essential things. One is it should help us to understand the relationship with God, that is Sambandha, and how to act in that relationship, that is Abhideya, and how to attain the goal of that relationship or Prayojana, which is love and service to God. Now, but of these three, Bhakti Yoga is the best path. Why? Because it is the most direct method of God realization, as Krishna will describe in the further chapters of the Gita. So in this process of Bhakti Yoga, Lord personally helps the devotee, Yoga Kshemam. He provides what you lack and preserve what you have. Ananyas Chintayan Tamam Yajana Parya Vasitisham Nityabhyukthanam Yoga Kshemam. He personally helps the devotee in this process of Bhakti Yoga. And the other paths and all the other paths might ultimately have to culminate in Bhakti Yoga. Even if you don't do Bhakti Yoga and take to Karma Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, they will not give the result if you don't add Bhakti to it. And so that shows how important is Bhakti. Now, following any of these methods, one is sure to reach the supreme goal sooner or later. Okay, even if someone doesn't come to Bhakti straight away, if he takes to the other yoga process, eventually they will come to this Bhakti. So, and even little endeavor on the transcendental path offers a great hope for deliverance. So Krishna is giving this assurance that if you take this yoga process, eventually you will be free from the threefold miseries and the effect of the three modes. And now Krishna wants to assure Arjuna that there is no misfortune. So Arjuna, one who is engaged in auspicious activities, this yoga is said to be auspicious because the soul is auspicious. Shiva means auspicious. Kalyanakrit, he does not meet with the destruction or misfortune, Durgatim. What is misfortune? Means to forget that we are the soul, either in attaining spiritual goals or in material goals. Whatever goals we may have, material or spiritual, it is possible when we realize that we are the soul, because the matter is dependent on the soul. Now, an unsuccessful yogi falls after a short practice, attains the planets of the pious and enjoys there for many years. Now, a person who fell off in the beginning of yoga is because he got distracted by some desire. So what does Krishna do? He fulfills the desire, which is possible in the higher planets, where it's very easy to fulfill the desire. So having, just like if a person is, you feed him nicely, he will give up that desire. So sometimes the fire can be extinguished by putting more fuel or depriving the fuel. So the person who falls off in the beginning stage of yoga, because he fell down because of unfulfilled desires, Krishna first fulfilled his desire so much so that he is fully satisfied and he is no longer hankering for desire. Then he takes birth in the house of the righteous or wealthy people. Where, because once he takes birth in a righteous or wealthy family, he doesn't have to work hard for the money or to practice piety. Prapya punyak pitam lokan ushitva shashwati sama shuchinam shrimatam gehe yoga prashtopi jayate. Some yogis, even though perfected their practice by fate, develop a desire to enjoy and then accept such enjoyment. There are examples like Saubri Muni. He was meditating deep within the water, but somehow he had a desire to marry, and then he was able to fulfill that desire. And after fulfilling the desire, he again came back to his yoga practice, or even Vishwamitra Muni for that matter. Unsuccessful yogi falls after long practice. What about a person who has almost reached perfection and then fell off? He takes his birth in a family of greatly wise yogis. Certainly, such a birth is rare in this world. In other words, to be a devotee is very rare. But still, he takes birth in a devotee family. So he doesn't have to go through this other yoga process. And he is able to directly come to Bhakti Yoga and please the Lord in this lifetime. So he is able to resume the yoga. In both cases, one revives the divine consciousness of his previous life and strives again even harder. The failure becomes a stepping stone for success and he attains complete perfection. He naturally becomes attracted to yoga principles. Nobody has to induce him to take to yoga. He naturally takes to yoga process even without seeking them. Such an inquisitive yogi surpasses the ritualistic principles of the scriptures. The ritualistic principles of the scriptures are meant to elevate a person through the three modes. But this yogi is able to transcend the three modes because he has already practiced in his previous life. And due to some minor mistake, he fell down. So there are examples like King Bharata, who was an emperor. He had all the comforts that a man can desire. But he renounced everything and went to the forest. But his meditation broke when he got attached to a deer. And that made him take birth as a deer. But still he was conscious about his yoga practice. And so he was able to take birth again as Jadavarta and detach himself from this world and attain perfection. And so attaining perfection, when such a yogi certainly endeavors for perfection. So basically we have to endeavor for perfection. We have to put our effort, then God will reciprocate. And he is washed of all contaminations. Contamination means this tendency to do this other yoga process, one kind of contamination. He ultimately achieves the supreme goal of liberation after many births of practice. After Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan Mam Prapattiti. This verse 728 means that after many lifetimes, one realizes that Vasudeva Sarvam, that is the transcendental goodness, is the ultimate position he should aspire for. So in conclusion of this chapter, Krishna is telling how Bhakti Yogi is the topmost. A yogi is greater than the tapasvi, jnani, and karmi. So all around you, you find these categories. One is the tapasvi bhyodiko yogi, jnani bhyopi matodika, karmi bhyaschadiko yogi, tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. In other words, Krishna is encouraging Arjuna to become a devotee or be a devotee. A yogi or bhakti yogi is greater than the ascetic. Ascetic means one who is performing austerities and penances to attain mystic powers. A yogi or bhakti yogi is better than the empiricist or jnana yogi who is trying to speculate Sankhya and attain liberation, personal liberation. And the yogi or bhakti yogi is greater than the fruitive worker, karmi yogi or karmi, who is only interested in the results. Therefore, Arjuna, in all circumstances, be a yogi. So if he is a yogi or a devotee, he is constantly associating with Krishna and feeling the presence of Krishna everywhere. The word yoga means linking with the Supreme. That is when the yoga attains perfection. All these other processes are only leading to perfection, but they are not perfect. But when one comes to Bhakti Yoga, then he really attains the goal of yoga. Because the goal of yoga is Yogeshwara or Krishna. When the linking process is predominantly in fruitive activity, it is called Karma Yoga. When it is predominantly empirical and analytical, it is called Jnana Yoga. And when it is predominantly in the devotional relationship with the Supreme Lord and service to Him, it is called Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga or Krishna consciousness is the ultimate perfection of all yogas as well as explained in the next verse. Last verse of this chapter says, the Bhakti Yogi who serves Krishna is the best of all yogis. In other words, he attains the complete perfection. Yoginam api sarvesham, of all types of yogis who is trying to endeavor for perfection. The one who madgaten antaratmana. Madgati means within himself. Antaratmana, always abides in me. He is always taking direction from Krishna, thinks of Krishna before making his actions or decisions. Saddhavan bhajate yoma. How he is able to do that? Because of great faith. Faith which comes through knowledge and realization. And what does he do? Bhajate yoma. Bhajate means worships and renders service. He engages his body, mind, words, and soul completely dedicated to the Lord. Same yukta tama mataha. Tama means ultimately, most intimately united with me in yoga. He's constantly in touch with the Lord. This is the other important words in Bhagavad Gita is Manmana Bhava Mat Bhakto Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru. So that verse is repeated twice in the Bhagavad Gita to emphasize its importance of always abiding in Krishna, thinking of Krishna, worshipping and rendering service to Krishna. This verse is a conscious statement of bhakti, the process of direct surrender to Bhagavan Krishna, which will be defined and elaborated in the middle 6 chapters, that is chapter 7 to 12 of the Bhagavad Gita, and it's the thread-like ornament on the neck of the devotees or bhaktas. The bhakta is like a golden mountain, while the others are just high and low mountains. Just like the Mount Everest is there, it is the tallest among all the mountains. If you climb the Mount Everest, you can see all the other mountains. So if you practice Bhakti Yoga, you can get the benefit of all the other yogas and more. That is the conclusion of this chapter. We'll stop here. Thank you very much. We'll meet next week for the practical application of these first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, which are basically perfection through work or karma yoga.